Semantic overloading is not a clinical term in psychology. It is a descriptive way of understanding how language can be distorted in high conflict or manipulative communication. In abusive relational dynamics, this often overlaps with known mechanisms such as gaslighting, equivocation, and strategic ambiguity. The core effect is not confusion for its own sake. The effect is destabilization of shared meaning so that reality becomes negotiable on one side only. Human communication depends on stable reference points. Words must map to shared definitions for cooperation to work. Cognitive science describes this as grounded semantics. When a term loses stability, the listener is forced to constantly reevaluate meaning in real time. This increases cognitive load and reduces working memory available for independent reasoning. Research and discourse analysis shows that repeated redefinition of terms can impair a listener's ability to form consistent conclusions about events. In manipulative context, the tactic appears as controlled inconsistency. A word is used one way in one moment and a different way later without acknowledgement. The listener is then treated as if they are the one who misunderstood. Over time, this produces semantic drift inside the relationship. The target begins to doubt whether any interpretation is reliable. This is where fragmentation of perceived reality can occur. A documented parallel exists in high-conflict workplace environments. Organizational psychologists have observed this pattern in toxic leadership structures. A manager may redefine performance terms such as urgent, or quality, or acceptable, depending on outcome. Employees in these systems report chronic uncertainty and decision fatigue. Studies on role ambiguity show measurable increases in stress hormones and decreased task performance under conditions where definitions are unstable. A similar mechanism appears in coercive persuasion environments studied by social psychologists. In controlled group settings, language is gradually loosened from fixed meaning. Terms like loyalty, truth, or growth are expanded until they include contradictory behaviors. The result is not immediate confusion. The result is delayed cognitive collapse where prior standards no longer apply, but no new stable standards exist. In clinical context, therapists sometimes see a comparable pattern in patients emerging from emotionally abusive relationships. The patient struggles to define simple relational facts. Questions like, what do they mean? Or, was that an agreement? Become difficult to answer. This is not because the events are unknowable. It is because the interpretive framework was repeatedly disrupted. One useful case example comes from couples therapy literature. In high conflict couples, one partner may repeatedly shift the meaning of promise. At one moment it means intent. At another it means certainty. At another it means emotional expression. The other partner begins to lose confidence in any commitment language. This leads to withdrawal and hyperanalysis. Communication collapses not through argument, but through definition instability. From a linguistic standpoint, this relies on polysemy exploitation. Most words naturally have multiple meanings. Healthy communication resolves this through context and clarification. Manipulative communication weaponizes this flexibility by refusing clarification while demanding agreement. The listener is placed in a paradox where any interpretation can be retroactively invalidated. Cognitive load theory helps explain the downstream effect. When working memory is consumed by constant reinterpretation, less capacity remains for contradiction detection. This creates a state where the person can still think, but cannot stabilize conclusions. That instability is often experienced as confusion or self-doubt rather than external manipulation. The key feature is not complexity of language. It is inconsistency without resolution. In stable communication, ambiguity is reduced through feedback loops. In manipulative semantic overloading, those feedback loops are deliberately blocked. The result is not simply misunderstanding. The result is erosion of shared epistemic ground. The corrective process is not confrontation alone. It is reestablishing fixed definitions outside the interaction. Written records, third-party validation, and explicit restatement of terms restore semantic anchoring. Without that external structure, the mind tends to over-adapt to shifting language and treats instability as normal rather than imposed. At its core, this phenomenon is about control of meaning. When meaning becomes unstable, reality becomes negotiable. When reality becomes negotiable, the person who controls definitions controls perception.